For the record, I'm going to ask you your full name, Estelle.
Estelle Hoyt.
Okay, that is your full name.
Right, no middle name.
Where did you get Estelle from?
Well, it's funny. After all these years, I was born in a Polish hospital. And very recently, I had to look at my birth certificate, and I found my name was not Estelle, but Estella, with an A at the end.
Is that right?
And after all these years, I said, I'm not changing the image.
No,
it's Estelle.
of course not. Right, there was a potential whole new identity.
Right, right.
And do you have any idea where that name came from in a family tradition?
Unfortunately, no.
No, you
no,
don't.
no.
Okay. I'm not sure whether I'm anticipating another question, but given whatever your present family lifestyle is that your birth name, your full name, or is it a maiden name? Or
No, I was born Estelle Schoenberger.
Okay.
And then when I was married, I had the name Hoyt. When I was divorced, I had too many of the families calling me on the school phone asking for Senora Hoyt. And that was it. As soon as and I knew that Schoenberger would not live very long on the lips of a lot of my Spanish families.
Yes,
so Hoyt became much easier for them, and I stayed with it.
All right. And that's how most people in the district know you then.
Right, right.
Did you, growing up, did you have any pet names or nicknames?
Yeah, Shrimpy.
Shrimpy. Who gave you that one?
I was brought up by an aunt and uncle, and he, I guess, seeing how I was the shortest one in class, in the family, and everything, that's how I arrived at Shrimpy.
So a term of affection.
Oh yeah,
yes.
Yeah, it was a term of affection.
Yeah. So your current family situation then is that
I'm divorced.
You're divorced.
Many years. I have 3 sons,
mm-hmm.
and I have 2 grandchildren.
Tell me, first of all, name your sons and tell me about each one of them. Okay.
Okay. My oldest one is Miles Andrew, but he's always had the moniker of Andy Hoyt. He's a professor of molecular biology. In his words, he was going to learn how to clone mothers who were social workers.
God bless.
And he's down in Johns Hopkins. And my middle son kind of follows something I've kind of lived vicariously through him, because he's an actor and entertainer, and right now he's a musical director. And
that's fascinating.
Right. He's been on Broadway a number of times.
Give us some of his credits, or if you can.
Okay. He started out with something called Leader of the Pack, where he learned to play like 4 or 5 different instruments. He was gifted in the area of playing the piano. He taught himself to play the piano.
Amazing, yes.
And played by ear till he was probably in 4th grade. In Levittown schools, they had a wonderful music program, and he learned to play the trumpet and to read music.
Mm.
And he just applied that, so he stopped playing by ear and went on. But I think that early ability to play by ear is what has made him so popular. People hire him for auditions, something to do with transposing music very easily, etc. I am what they call audience. I have a musical ear, but I never really played any instrument, so I'm there for the applause. So.
Your second,
and that's my middle son.
The middle son's name is
Lon.
Lon.
Lon
Okay.
Jamie Hoyt. I think we got all those names off bottles of scotch, as a matter of fact. Because I have Miles Andrew, Lon Jamie, and Jeffrey Bryan.
Oh,
so you see,
yes,
so they're all 3 of them. Lon has been on Broadway, as I say. He was in Leader of the Pack. He was in Starlight Express. He was... his most recent was he was musical director for Street Corner Symphony, which had a short-lived success last year. And right now he is subbing in Footloose, playing the piano, playing the keyboards.
There must be some talent in that family of yours, or your husband's family, that this is a tradition.
Well, this is a kind of, and my youngest is now out in California. And I'm proud of the fact that he was a statistics major at Harvard. and went into, that was the funniest thing around the district, graduated from Harvard and went to work for the National Enquirer. So you know that was
now, did he work for them at one point, or he is still employed in that?
No, he worked for them right after college.
Okay, right after college.
He graduated from Harvard, went straight into the National Enquirer, and started earning more money than I had been earning after being in the district 15 years.
Now, was he as a journalist or as
if you want to put it that way,
yeah, okay. But he's writing.
Yes, he was writing, and it did help him. He was writing a lot of medical information. And then from there, he moved out to California. He's still been doing writing, and he's now doing TV producing.
So you have two sons in the entertainment field at the present time.
Absolutely. And I did something wrong with my oldest because he's straight. But as I say...
Are the personalities of each son very
totally different?
They are.
Totally different, yeah.
How would you describe the attributes or the personalities of each one of them?
Well, as I say, my oldest one is the typical, well, not the typical, usually the oldest child is the big achiever.
Yes.
He was not competitive at all. He, in achieving, yes, but not through competition. He was a marvelous older brother.
Role model to the, yes.
Very much so. When I think back now, I probably would have referred myself to CPS, that Child Protective Services, because I remember leaving him with his two. The three of them were born within a 4-year period. So
very close.
Very close. He was about 8. I remember going to a school conference, letting him stay at the park with the other two for about an hour, taking care of them. When I got back there, he had taught my youngest how to play chess. And the older one, the middle one rather, was involved with they loved to be with him. And he was a very, very good older brother. I really mean it. He was not an aggressive kid.
They say the firstborn tend to be very responsible too, and have a very responsible.
Yeah, he was a very and is a responsible person.
The interests and the careers you've pretty much described, and the differences between them, and how their lives have taken different turns. You mentioned grandchildren, I think.
Right, I have only my middle son, the musical director, whatever. He has given me the pleasure, Lon, of having 2 grandchildren, a granddaughter, which was unique. I have 2 sisters, and between the 3 of us, we had 8 sons.
My goodness.
So this was the first granddaughter. She's 11 now, and my grandson, who's 8.
And their names are?
She is Lisbeth, which I still have problems pronouncing, and he is Lauren, Loren.
Okay. They're old enough at this point that their personalities have begun to emerge, and you can see certain qualities?
To a certain extent. Yeah. They live in New Jersey.
Do you have much contact, Estelle?
I see them about once a month.
Okay.
Maybe once, yeah.
Where were you born?
I was born in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Okay. Give me a time frame. Are you a Roosevelt baby?
Oh, no, I'm before that.
Before Roosevelt. Yeah. Okay, so you would have known.
Wait, when was he? 33?
Yeah, he was 32. 30, yeah.
Right.
So, okay. Yeah. And do you have any memories? What's your earliest memory as a child?
Well, I had an atypical background. My mother had died when I was an infant. So I was, my sisters and I were separated, and we were given to maternal aunts to live with. And I don't think I remember anything except maybe about 4 or 5 years of age, probably 5 or 6, when my middle sister and I were given to one aunt, and my oldest sister was given to an aunt in New York City. That was the Lower East Side at that time. And I grew up in Jamaica. And the aunt who reared me was a businesswoman in those days, which was very unique. She ran a business. She was into real estate. She was really a very strong, I guess she was my role model for feminism.
And your mother at that time, was she?
My mother had died.
No, before your mother died. Was
Yeah.
she? Was your father and your mother living together
Yes,
at that time?
yes, they were. But he just, I guess, could not see bringing up 3 daughters,
Okay.
and it was not. It's different from today.
Yes, it was.
So
Sure.
he just took
Okay.
off. Let's put it that way.
Yes, not the first
Yeah,
time I've heard
right,
that story.
Right. So
In
we were,
other people's lives.
right, right.
Did you have any regular contact with your sisters in the Lower East Side who lived with your other?
Yes. Probably once or twice a month, we would take a ride down there. It was totally different. I grew up, as I said, in Jamaica,
Yes.
and although my aunt, it was a different lifestyle for my.
Jamaica back then must have been suburban in a sense. That
It was very much suburban. We lived right across from Kings Park, which was a very large park, and George Washington, who slept around a lot, even more, they had a sign, he slept there, etc., at this house. And I, as a kid, used to go there quite a bit, to visit Rufus Manor, I think it was called.
So the Lower East Side was
and the Lower
all
East
of what
Side
we know
was,
it to have been at that
yeah,
at that time.
I remember the bathrooms out in the hallway, and it was a walk-up tenement. My aunt, who brought my sister up, my aunt and uncle were, to me, ancient. I have no idea, looking back, how they maintained themselves, because they were both home with her. She was their only child, and we were brought up very differently, very differently.
Well, it sounds like you would have been from
the environment. Yeah. I've often thought of writing a book, but I'm not that disciplined. How the difference from one environment to the other.
Never say never. You don't know.
Well.
So where were you in the birth order among your own sisters?
I was the youngest.
That's right. So there was the nickname again. I forgot about that.
Right.
Yeah. Your sisters and your aunts then had, even though you didn't live with all your sisters, they had an impact on your life and were an influence.
Right. My sister, who has subsequently died, the firstborn, was 10 years older than I. The one who was brought up on the Lower East Side, and my next sister was 6 years older. And we were brought up, unfortunately, I would feel, as more distant cousins than sisters. We really had, the one who stayed with me till she was 14 did not get along with my aunt. They had a similar personality. And my aunt had her leave when she was about 14, and she went to live with my other sister in that environment. And I learned soon enough that if you disobeyed or disagreed with my aunt, you got your walking papers. So I was brought, that affected my personality.
You learned to be accommodating.
Oh, very much so, and passive. And no one will ever believe this when they see this.
Yes. Well, it's important to have the skills, even though if you don't always apply them.
Right, absolutely. So,
were there other adult influences that were important in your early, in the formative years besides, you mentioned your aunt and...
other adult influences?
But not necessarily family. There might have been other people who you remember, have strong memories of that pop up out of the past.
Well, I had several cousins, one in particular, who had gone to college and had been a language major at Queens College. And I thought that was something that I would like to do, because in high school I did very well in Spanish. And so she kind of led the way. I was the only one in my immediate family that went to college. I think I did it because growing up in this, quote, atypical situation, I tended to stay with kids in school who were high achievers, and I was able to make it by studying. I was a studier. I was not a social being. I was a studier. And as a result, when they all talked about going to college, I kind of felt, well, I'm going to compensate for what I lacked in my background.
Was that a conscious thought at the time?
I don't know if it's conscious, but they were all going to college. They all came from typical homes. And so when they talked about going here and there, I applied, and I had the average to get into Queens College. You needed, and another one of my cousins, a sister to the one I had mentioned before, she was an office manager of a store near where I lived. And so I was able to go to work after school from the time I was about 13. So I could save money, you know, to go to college.
Sure.
Right.
Was you didn't know as soon as you started your higher education that you were going to go into the field that you went into?
No, not at all.
That was a decision that happened later.
No, I majored in Spanish and French and education. Mm-hmm. And I was going to be a Spanish teacher, very definitely, and with some French thrown in, which I have long forgotten. But what happened was it was back in the McCarthy era.
Yes.
And
this
when
is in the 50s then.
Right, and when I went to do my student teaching, I think I mentioned something about Franco being a dictator at that time, and the teacher in the class took me aside and said, "Do you want a job in New York City?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Don't talk about politics." She said, "You cannot talk about that at all and have a job." And at that particular time, they also had not given the language test in New York City for many, many years. And you had to take a test with the Board of Examiners and things like that.
In other words, does that say that they had a sufficient number of teachers to deal with the students that were
Yeah, I suppose they did. But as soon as I realized that I would be censored for things that I would want to share with the kids, I kind of thought about it more. And I remember one day I was driving, and no, I was riding in a car because I wasn't driving at that time. That's right. I learned to drive after I was married. I remember that. Having had my ex-husband as an instructor. But I was riding in a car, and I heard something about the city of New York needed Spanish-speaking social workers. In those days, they called them social investigators.
Oh, I see.
And I thought to myself, gee, let me go find out about it. And although I was able to read and write in Spanish, the type of teaching in those days was concentrating on reading and writing and not too much in verbal. But in that office, nobody else knew because I was the only Spanish, quote, Spanish-speaking social worker in the office. So I remember and in those days, even though in the city of New York you made home visits, and oh yes, I went out all the time making visits, and I remember going out.
Doctors were still making home visits in those days too.
That's right, because it was pretty much, it was a few years prior to the onset of drugs. I think drugs came about the end of the 50s, early 60s or so. The only thing I was ever afraid of going around was finding rats because I went into basements and, things like that. But I was never afraid of people. Yeah. But I had the attitude when I first went out, well, you're either going to sink or swim. And I will say that visiting in those days, most of the population was Puerto Rican. Mm-hmm. And if you show them that you were trying to speak the language, they met you like 85% of the way.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. And so I stayed on that job for about 7 years. And before retiring to greener pastures and having my life was like 5-year plans.
How did you find, well, who influenced you, or was it just circumstances rather than a person that influenced you to go into the career, into social work? Was it just circumstance and
I think it was
opportunity?
circumstances.
Yeah.
I had done several, well, after I gave birth to my oldest son, and then as years went on, and I was home because, as I said, for the next 4 years I had 3 children. But every once in a while I had listed myself as a teacher, although I did not work full-time as a teacher. I really didn't have, I guess, I didn't want to leave the kids, having grown up in a situation
Yes, sure.
where I had been left.
Yes.
But once in a while, they would call me for a home teaching, and if the time coincided when they were in school, I did do some home teaching, and then did some subbing. And I remember in my subbing time, I kind of liked the idea of wanting to know what made a kid tick more than teaching him grammar. I mean, as much as I love the language, there was also the behavior component, and I felt I really would like to know more. And so then I went on to work at Pilgrim for Pilgrim State Hospital.
Before you do that,
yeah,
talking about what makes a youngster tick, I want to go down that road with you for a few minutes and ask you about some of your early formative career influences. And to that end,
right.
do you remember any of your childhood or your high school friends? Do you remember any of the names of any of the people?
Oh, dear. Most of I had one very close friend. We grew up as almost sisters, and she had older sisters, and fortunately for her older sisters, that's how I learned the facts of life, because my aunt was non-communicative in that area. And we did stay friends through college. And then she married, and we stayed friends after we both married. I married someone from Queens College. In fact, he was a fraternity brother of my friend's husband. And as we were separating, unfortunately, we no longer stayed together. And in subsequent years, I heard that they had separated too, and I guess it was just something. Okay. A few of my other friends from high school have either died or moved away, so I really don't have anyone.
Estelle, did your aunt give you chores, or did you have responsibilities at home to do? She was in business, and so therefore you would have probably...
very much. But she let me have pretty well free reign. I worked after school.
Now, you mentioned that before. You said, what was your first job? Your first paying job?
Yeah, as a clerk.
As a clerk, okay.
As a file clerk. I knew the alphabet, so I got the job because
I'm going to assume that you've answered this question. You said your interests as a child were very much bookish. That is, you loved to read. You pursued study.
Yeah, right.
And you were interested in the subjects that you mentioned before too.
Right.
Specifically.
Yes. Right.
You and today. I'll ask if there's been a change over the years. Do you consider yourself a night person or a day person?
Oh, I'm definitely a night person.
Has that changed?
Oh, no, I've always been. Always been. And my kids, if I heard a child cry at like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, I knew he had a raging fever, because my kids pretty well followed the schedule that I made up. I nursed my kids, which was something very avant-garde in those days.
Okay.
And
yes. Do you have a favorite season of the year? This is an off-the-wall someplace out. Is there one season?
I think it's spring. I think it's the rebirth is what I like.
Speaking about rebirths too, now the first full day of school in your life. Do you remember any part of it? The first day you went. I'm talking about when you were a student.
Oh, when I was a student.
What school would that have been, by the way?
I went to Public School 170, which was a school on a hill in Jamaica that went from kindergarten up through 8th grade. The only thing I remember about my experiences there were, one thing always stood out in my mind, and I think it affected my reaction on this job. My last name was Schoenberger. As I said, my family name, who brought me up, was Diamond, and it was a constant thing. My aunt was totally illiterate, could not even write her own name, despite her ability in business.
Was she born in this country?
No,
she was not.
Both, and my aunt and uncle were European. And
can I ask where in Europe they came from?
It was like Austria, Poland.
I see. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And they had a son who I called my brother.
Yes.
He was 20 years my senior, and he would sign all the time. And of course, teachers were always asking me, "Well, how come your name isn't the same?" You know, I can't say with the amount of sensitivity that they ask now. But in those days, it was a constant question, etc., for me. And I remember I was always a very quiet kid. I was always the last one out of school, though. I liked to be there. And the only thing I did remember is when I graduated, I had to make my own graduation dress by hand.
Yes.
And I sat very still during graduation because I was sure I'd rip every stitch if I moved too fast.
What a great story that is. Yeah.
So that, you know. And then I went up to the Jamaica High School.
That was my next question. Yes.
Right, Jamaica High School, 4 years at Jamaica High. And
you remember any of your teachers?
oh, yes, Mr. Lundari, a very handsome-looking man, you know, who was the French teacher. And he had an overpopulation of female students. I and a couple of other my friends were his secretaries, so we were just overjoyed to take French. It's funny, I don't remember my Spanish teacher. I think they were all women. I really don't remember anything about. I'm trying to remember who they were. I remember Mr. Wolf for social studies. And but Mr. Lundari stayed in my mind, really.
How fortunate we are that we have a couple of people from our high school experience that we remember.
Right. Yes.
Were there least favorite subjects in school, Estelle?
Math.
Okay. Well, one of your sons at least.
Right, the one that,
compensates for
believe me, his math concepts at 4 years of age were far beyond mine. I used to take him shopping, and he would figure out the unit price of something while I'd be still figuring. This is before unit prices came out. He'd say to me, "Ma, this is cheaper," you know. And this was, people would look at him and think he was a little midget because he's sitting in the little top seat there, and he'd say, "Don't buy that, buy that." And I'd say, "How do you do that?" You know.
Where did you go to school after Jamaica High School?
Queens College.
You went to Queens.
Right,
That's right. You applied and were accepted.
Right. And and it really was, when you think about it, it was kind of discriminatory because women had to have a higher average than the men. But then again, the men were returning from the war.
At that point, it was after 45.
Okay.
Just about. Now, did you go on to graduate school at that point?
No,
or did you,
not at all.
Once you got your baccalaureate, you left? And
no,
went to work?
I had enough of school.
Yeah,
and I wanted a job. I got married a year after I graduated. Got married in 50. And I was thrilled that I had this job in the city. I was part of the city, New York.
What were you working? What field were you working in at that time?
That was when I became the social investigator. That was the term that they used for the social workers. And I stayed with them for about 6 or 7 years till I was in my almost 9th month of pregnancy. And the funny thing is, in those days, you could not work beyond your 4th month.
Right.
But luckily, it was also the style of the dirndl skirt. So I hid it. And I'll never forget, the only problem was most of the poor people live on the top floors. And my son was born the beginning of September. And I visited these two sisters. You would visit the elderly every 6 months. And they were so thrilled to see you, you know. And I climbed up the stairs, and the minute they saw me, one of them said to me in Spanish, "You're pregnant." And I said, No. And she said, "Oh, yes, you are."
Gotcha.
Yeah. I said, "Oh, don't tell anybody," because Yeah.
Where were you
It was
living at that
August.
time? Were you living in Jamaica?
Yes, we had yeah, that time we were living in Jamaica. I didn't move out to Seaford till after my son was born.
Hmm.
And he was about 3 months old. And then we bought our house, which I'm still living in. I live a very sedentary life.
Did you hear about the opportunities in Brentwood after you were in Seaford then?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The opportunity in Brentwood came about.
What year would that have been now that you heard about Brentwood?
I was working Pilgrim as a social worker.
Now, let's go back to that.
Right.
Yes. Okay, so you left the city.
I had been...
by the way, Pilgrim Hospital, State Hospital, it was called at that time, was like a small city.
Oh, yeah. Right. And what happened was I had no thought. I had been, while I was home, as I said, I did home teaching and I did subbing in Spanish. And I also, by dint of life experience, I became a nursery school teacher, first as a helping teacher, and then I was able to, it was a part-time job when my youngest was in kindergarten. And so I was able to coordinate my time at work with them. And I had some very interesting experiences as a nursery school teacher, I remember. And then I met a friend of mine who was the head of social workers at Pilgrim. She said, hey, look, I'm looking for, quote, retired social workers. Would you like to come on? I have it was a program trying to get the geriatric patient to accept the Social Security. They were being awarded Social Security benefits even though they had never worked. Yes. But if they were over 70 years of age. And so I started back there. And the proximity to Brentwood, one day I happened to open a newspaper, and I had thought I wanted a job that incorporated 3 S's, Spanish, social work, and school, so that my hours would coordinate with my kids.
Exactly.
So I read an article in the paper. It had been through St. Joseph, talking about the need for Spanish-speaking social workers.
Now, this would have been...
in 1969.
Okay.
I read about it, probably was maybe the beginning of 69 or so. And I came in and I applied.
Mm-hmm.
And
and who interviewed you?
Let me see. I was interviewed, I believe, by Jack Smith at that time.
Yes.
And
now you had been working with geriatric clients, and so now you're making a transition to young people.
But I had enough education courses, and I had the nursery school experience.
And you had that.
And I came in, and again, when I was in the city of New York, I was the first Spanish-speaking social worker there, I believe, in my office in Amsterdam. And I came into Brentwood as the first.
I was going to say that was probably a very important skill that you brought with you.
There were none of the other social workers, but I came in under Title 9, I believe it was. There was some title that I came in. John Finan also interviewed me because I had come in under that title. And I didn't have my master's at that time. And
were you encouraged at that point to start thinking about pursuing it, or was that something that you just saw you had to do?
It was something I saw I had to do, right. So,
do you have any first impressions of Brentwood when you arrived?
Well, when I first arrived...
or maybe another way of answering the same question, Estelle, would be some enjoyable memories of those early years, too. I'm not quite sure if that's a different question or the same.
Well, enjoyable memories. I didn't know what to expect.
Yeah.
And in my capacity, I was 5 days of the week, 5 different principals. I was in a different school every day.
You were being bounced.
I was, you've heard of Meals on Wheels.
Yes.
This was social work on wheels. You know, I felt like a Band-Aid. I was going from one place to the other. It was frenetic, but it fit in with my personality.
Okay.
And I enjoyed the fact that at that time, I think there was only one female. Dottie Grimm was at South elementary. They assigned me to the elementary school. They felt that, and over the years, of course, I had most of my families were in the elementary, but I was called upon to the middle and the high school for situations where Spanish was necessary. But I remember Chuck Pulio had wanted me to be a sort of public relations person. And so I arranged.
Was he a principal at
He was
one point?
principal. He was my principal.
You were principal.
At Twin Pines.
I see. Yeah.
And I had Mr. Fishman at Pine Park, and I had Dottie, and Village, dear, and I loved the man. He was the last principal at Village, Mr.
If
I
it'll
can't
pop back
remember.
into your mind in a couple of minutes, and then you'll mention it any time it occurs to you. Okay.
Right. And but Mr. Pulio wanted to go into the community, and so I arranged for visits in the evening with community people. We'd go over to someone's house and have like a block party, I knew that the parents loved to cook, and so I arranged celebrations in school for different Spanish holidays. And it was really, I remember back then.
In some ways, a simpler time.
Yes, I suppose.
Even though the problems were as complex then as they are.
Very much so.
Yes.
Very much so.
And let me just say that the reason I say a simpler time is the fact that you're making home visits and contacts with parents.
I continued that.
You did?
Oh, yes. I always.
How wonderful. You did.
Well, my early training was to meet people on their turf and not on mine. I always made home. Even now, it was very funny. As I go wandering, I think I know practically every street in Brentwood because I've always made home visits. First of all, you can't always expect in suburbia everybody have a car. And secondly, I used to take teachers who wanted to come with me to the home because I felt overcoming the barriers. Very early on, I had gone to some educational workshop, and I remember a teacher in New York City saying, if you want to overcome behavior problems, you break bread with that family. And I told that to teachers, and teachers over the years took advantage.
There are some people listening that are going to hear what you're saying in a new light, even now.
Oh, yes. Oh, well, I remember the teachers, whether they were teachers in special ed or teachers in some of the elementary schools, they would come and say to me, Estelle, can we go after school? And we would go. And it worked. It really worked. Some of these kids.
All of your background and your training really did then prepare you for what you found in Brentwood as much as you didn't know what to expect.
That's
you
true.
were ready.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't know what to expect.
I'm curious, your role has always had a job description attached to it, but how did you define your purpose all these years?
Well, I defined my purpose here as being the liaison between the home and the school, of helping people, whether they were new immigrants or people unaccustomed to our culture, quote, our school rules, etc., of trying to have them understand what was expected and to have the kids understand the need to. I'm also an attendance teacher. I got that. I had gotten that along the way. In those days, when I came in to Brentwood, you had to be certified, not as a social worker, but as an attendance teacher. So I had that certification.
Now, is there something else that I didn't know enough to ask you that you did, that you can tell us about besides the?
Well, in the early days, George Klein, who was the head of attendance, would ask me or some of his attendance teachers if there were families with chronic truant kids, I would go out, and it was a mixture of attendance teacher and social work to get them back, you know. And there were times I picked up the kids and drove them.
Has there been any contact maintained with any of these youngsters that you've known over the years?
It's funny.
You ever hear any stories? Or?
It was about, maybe about 8, 9 years ago, I happened to be invited to a wedding. I had a community aide, and one of her daughters got married, and I went, and the neighbors there are still kids that I saw when they were in 3rd and 4th grade. And I remember this one young man, Santos his name was, came over to me and said, "Mrs. Hoyt, are you still here?" And he had been in the Coast Guard and had traveled around the world. And I looked at him and I said, "Santos, next to the pyramids exists still Hoyt." so he laughed. And I still, once in a while, the community aide lives in Puerto Rico, but I have had occasion, unfortunately, that daughter has recently died, and I went to see her, and I saw the young man again. What I also meet up with in my capacity, in the summertime, have been evaluating kindergarten children. I've been doing this for many years as to their language. And so over the years, I've had opportunity to have people come over to me and say, "Oh, you're still here."
Isn't that wonderful?
And they are the young people that I knew.
Of students that you had known.
Right. Yeah.
You are, in many ways, similar to young people coming into the field of education today. When you entered the profession, you came with an extensive experience of your own in other ways, in other fields. Did you immediately, did you join BTA, or was BTA in existence at the time you came here? Yes.
Yes, it was in existence.
That would have been nice at New York State United Teachers.
Didn't.
Did you belong, or were you involved?
No,
with any professional organization?
I think I was involved with the NEA. I don't remember joining BTA right away. And
at some point along the way,
it was a little bit of difficulty because I was very much involved with bilingual education here in Brentwood.
Oh, yes.
And there was a kind of schism there.
Yes, there was. Those were the days of the...
Right. And
there was a lot of politics involved.
Exactly. And I just felt that my allegiance was more to what the kids needed.
The politics, I should say, involved whether or not bilingual education was something that was necessary, and therefore whether support to those people who were teaching it was also a responsibility of the organization or the profession, or whether or not support should be withdrawn and it should be phased out. That was the issue, I think. Right.
And that was it. And so I really was not a member of BTA until we all became members of BTA.
When would that have been?
I don't remember.
Do you remember
when
in the 70s or 80s?
Yeah, I think it was when you had to become a member.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see. I'm conscious of our time flying here, so I'm gonna move through some other questions. But first of all, there are people, well, I'm not quite sure. No. We're going to cut this part of the interview out where I stumble all over myself like this, because I'm not quite sure where I'm going next. This would be then the end of the beginning in terms of some of your reflections. These questions would have to do with beginning of your new life, let's call it, since you've retired, and at the same time looking back. At some point, you decided that it was time for you to leave, that you were ready, or at least amenable to retirement.
And I think Mother Nature played a big part in that.
Is that right?
Well, I drive in from Seaford, and it was the year where, like, at least once or twice a week during the winter, we had very icy roads.
Oh, yes.
And I hated, that was in '96. And I just don't like driving on the ice.
Yes.
And I remember making a home visit visiting somebody in the basement, and as I was walking up the stairs, I slipped on the ice. And I said, Mother Nature is telling me it's time to move on.
This is not fun. I don't want to risk this.
Yeah.
What year did you retire?
96.
Okay. So that was the year that you put in your papers.
Right. Very reluctantly, by the way.
Really, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I had a lot of difficulty with the idea. And it was a very important phase in my life.
Of all of the things that you've done in the field of education and the profession, Estelle, I don't know if this is a fair question because it's difficult. What has given you the most source of pride? What are you most proud of that you've accomplished?
You mean outside, professionally?
Yes, okay. Professionally.
I think I would like to think really that I've helped teachers understand that kids aren't all the same. That there were times that when homework was demanded, for example, and I knew that the kid didn't have a table to write on, and I would ask the teachers, let them do their homework in class after school, so that there would be some supportive person there. I think having teachers understand where the kids were coming from, I found is a very important thing. And I only could do that by visiting, by knowing what the kid's background was. I was also very aware of the fact that, and I made quite a big deal about having kids tested by people who spoke the language of the child. I don't care what the language was, because if you give a kid a psychological test and you are speaking in a different language, it is totally unfair. And I think over the years I made a point in that area with the powers that be.
What was your last assignment? What building were you assigned to when you retired?
I was, I was actually in Oak Park School and in North Elementary, but I was still on call throughout the district.
So you were still on call?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was still on call throughout.
At that point, when you retired, you were a social worker, though, by the time
yes, I got my master's.
How many years did you have in
Brentwood?
In Brentwood?
27 when I retired. But I'm still back here, you know. I come back for 3 months to do, unfortunately, not social work, but I still have a chance to mix with the kids. I evaluate their language.
In kindergarten, you mentioned.
I do that for 2 weeks in the summer.
Oh.
But
in addition to that, as of March, Nikki Ninbrash calls me back to evaluate the kids in the bilingual and ESOL programs to see if they should continue or be exited out of the programs. So I spend about 3 months of the year doing that. Do you remember what you made your first year in Brentwood? Do you remember what your salary was when you first came in?
I don't know. Was it 10, 12,000 or something like
probably,
that? Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
People are.
I remember my first. It's funny. You remember your very first salary when I worked for the city of New York. My yearly salary was $2,710 a year.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I was so proud.
Yes,
I was making more than my
That's the
ex-husband.
question I should have asked you.
Yeah, $2,710, and that was because I was a city employee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell me, or tell us, what you've been doing in addition to the things you've mentioned. What else have you been doing since you retired in '96?
Well, I am on the. I've been on the board of the National Association of Puerto Rican and Hispanic Social Workers, and through them, I have for many years participated in something called La Visión, which is a one-day conference for high school students from all over Suffolk County, a sort of a self-esteem conference. I've also been active now in something through the American Jewish Congress called Prejudice Reduction. They have a conference for educators. I also have become something, I returned to something that I loved when I was much younger. When you have 3 sons in 4 years, you got to do something for your mental health. So at that time, I took improvisational and acting. So now I went back. I am now a improv actress, I guess, with the Players, which is a group from...
A thespian.
Oh, yes.
Ah.
But I don't have to read lines. Last year I did something that was interesting. That was, by the way, for the Nassau County Mental Health Association.
Mm-hmm.
And this past summer, I was hired as a lecturer at a camp for seniors. And I ran a women's group talking about women's rights. And I also was their drama coach. Yeah,
it doesn't
right.
sound like there's anything left to do that you would like to do. It sounds like you're doing it all. Is there?
Well,
is there something yet ahead that you would that you have aspirations about doing? That's been not.
I don't. Well, I don't know.
Okay.
I'd like to travel a lot more.
Uh-huh.
I've started traveling when I was on the job, and then I've gotten lazy for the past year or so. But
doesn't sound like that to me, Estelle. What's one of the most powerful books you've ever read?
Oh, I can't even answer that.
Okay.
I really, it's interesting. I very rarely read for pleasure. Most of my reading has always been with the feel.
Goal oriented.
Right. Goal. Right. It's something that and that's something I would aspire to now. I've taken courses, by the way. I'm now taking a course on film and literature.
Oh, are you?
At Nassau Community College.
Have you taken any other courses since you retired?
Yes.
Tell me what you've done.
I took The Making of the Modern Mind, which traced the important influences in the 20th century. And then I took a course on different cultures.
Boy, there's been no moss growing on you since
well,
my goodness.
I'm still learning.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So.
Did you have heroes growing up?
No, not really.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I don't think so.
And it doesn't sound as if you've had time to miss anything about being away from the active scene, because you still sound as if you're very active and haven't had occasion to miss anything. You're still doing a lot.
Right. As I say, from September to March, I kind of take care of, I go to school and take care of things around the house, which is not my forte.
Is there anything that you would like to have accomplished that you feel as if you couldn't in the time or with the resources that you had while you were still as a social worker in the district?
In the district, well, I think I would have liked to have seen more Spanish-speaking personnel, come into the district, particularly in the field of, in the area of special education.
Okay.
Yeah. There was always that kind of thing that had come up. I was on lists.
There are people that will be following in your footsteps, that are already following in your footsteps, doing many of the things that you did while you were here. What do you see ahead for them? And perhaps is there any advice that you haven't already offered that you might be able to suggest?
Well, I have, spoken with people, and whether they're psychologists or social workers, and try to have them become aware of the fact that, number one, that kids are different, and that these differences should be taken into consideration. That looking at the whole child, and trying to have kids, as I said before, be evaluated fairly, whether it has to do with language or has to do with the kids' home circumstances. And
Had you left, Estelle, before the changes in the state curriculum and the pressure of the regents and so on began to be felt? Had you left before that?
it was
really?
just starting.
You're just starting.
It was just starting at that time.
That I can see is having a potential effect,
I'm
perhaps
sure.
both positively and negatively,
Yeah,
as time goes on.
yeah.
But if you're looking at the whole child, you're not just looking at their academic or
That's
achievement.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of these kids have strengths in areas that are not academic.
Yes.
And we're not accepting this, you know. There was a change. When I came into Brentwood, many of the kids wound up in classes for the retarded, who I felt were not.
We're not.
And I had quite a bit of fighting at that time. I think that was...
It sounds to me like you were involved in more than one political battle over your life, over the course of your career.
I would believe so.
Because that also becomes a political issue with
Right.
With funding,
Right.
and money.
Right, exactly. And that was very important too. And so that when there were different kinds of classes that the state started, like learning for the learning disabled, things like that, and viewing kids differently, different criteria for establishing the label retarded. I was very happy to see that the umbrella label was not applied
Unfortunately,
indiscriminately.
whenever, even if it's for a good reason, whenever you label somebody, you've damaged them. Isn't that true?
Oh, absolutely.
No matter what,
absolutely.
No matter what your rationale for doing
Oh,
it.
yeah. I've often said if I were in school today, I probably would be in a class for the learning disabled. I have mixed dominance. It affects my reading. I'm not a good reader. I had a plug in school. I really had to work hard to achieve. And that's why I was really always involved with studying. It was to be able to achieve. Nobody knew.
I think you just said something really profound in the sense that I think we all have to be able to recognize the learning disabled person that lives in each one of us.
Right.
Because we're all special and we're all learning disabled.
Absolutely.
And these terms become somewhat divisive as opposed to looking at the whole
Absolutely. My feeling, and I've told this to my son with my grandchildren, is motivation has to come from the kid. And I would tell that to the parents too, when they'd say to me, you know, they can't read in English and I'd say to them, it's not just be there, but not to do their work. Their work is their responsibility. And I brought up my kids with the idea. I used to say to them, I've gone to college. You want to go, you do your work. I'm not doing it for you.
It's up to you.
And I really am very strong. But it's interesting for me to see my son who sits with my grandchildren and going over her work and I see that she uses it as an attention-getting thing. And I say to myself, there are better ways for her to get attention, you know.
Yeah. Well, I must say, you have provided with yourself a wonderful role model to your sons, and I fear that I'm leaving out an important question that I haven't asked. I don't know what it is, and I wonder if you have any idea what question I have not asked, or if there's anything that has been left unexplored before we leave.
I'm trying to think.
Because this was a wonderful opportunity to...
I'll probably think about it tonight.
Well, I will too, and I can assure you I'll remember 3 things that I didn't ask. Estelle, I can't thank you enough for giving us the time, and I know that this will
I did have one very funny story.
Yes.
When I was hired, they hired a bilingual psychologist at the same time, a very lovely woman. And soon after we were on the job, she called me and asked me if I would come over and help her with a test. And I went to her office and I said, "What's the problem?" She said, "Well, I have to give this test in Spanish. I can't." I said, "Wait a minute, you're bilingual." And she said, "Yes, but I told them my other language is Yiddish."
Oh, funny. Oh,
And it
that's
was a
funny.
true story. She
That
could
is so
read.
funny.
She told them she could read and write in Spanish,
Yes.
but she didn't speak it. And she was bilingual, but they just didn't focus on where the bilinguality came. I will never forget. She was a lovely and very good psychologist for the English-speaking kids. But unfortunately,
That's wonderful.
she didn't last too many years because it was found. I said, I can't keep doing that. They're
Oh, no.
invalid
Oh,
if
no.
I'm interpreting
Yes,
to somebody
yes.
else. So that was a story that I remembered very much. So.
Well, thank you, and I will be sure to get a copy of this to you as soon as we can get that done for you. But Estelle, it's been a pleasure having you.
Same.
Thank
Yeah,
you so
thank you.
much.
Thank you.